Is the of the month, second Sunday of 2024, a year that's going to live in some kind of infamy one way or another. And that means that we have Tom Whitmore here. And when we have Tom, wait, that's Tom waving at the camera. He's the guy that's got, oh, yeah, when I say the guy with the without hair, that's me. The other guys in here still seem to be hanging on to some of it. Go guys, go! Uh, but as usual, he's brought us some wonderful guests. And Tom, tell us who you have brought to B Cube Sunday morning this morning.
Well, the people I have with me today are Debbie Notkin, who was my partner in the other Change of Hobbit and who I lived with for many years, and Ian Hageman, who is a Seattle area fan who has just gotten his master's in social welfare and started a counseling business. And we're going to talk about friendship and friends and how friends change over the years. And I'll let them say more about themselves as soon as we've gotten you out of here, Bob.
Okay, well, thank you guys, and I look forward to
Whoop.
And I look forward to listening.
There he goes. So, I've given a very short introduction. Why don't each of you take a moment or two and talk about what brings you here and why you're interested in friendship and relationships and the ways they change over time?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I will get this frog out of my throat in a minute, I promise. I suggested this topic because it was on my mind, and we'll maybe talk more later about what brought it up for me. I am a lifelong science fiction fan. I have been a professional editor at Tor. I have been a bookseller. I have been a book reviewer. I have run conventions. I have published fanzines in various degrees at various times. And I am now mostly not doing any of those things except reading the books, which I still do with frequently and with great delight. And I invited Ian, so I will ask him to introduce himself.
Well, I am also a lifelong science fiction fan. I've also run conventions and published fanzines. I'm here because Debbie invited me. She is one of my oldest and dearest friends, one of very few people who stayed with me during a real dark time in my life. And one of the things that I am really interested about in terms of friendship is that I think that, to quote Brene Brown, who's another social worker, connection is why we're here. And to quote Debbie, I think people who say just friends get it exactly backwards.
How do you mean that?
Well, I think...
Can I jump
sure.
in?
Yeah.
What I always say is anybody can get lovers. To get lovers, you either have to lower your standards or pay for it. But anybody can get lovers. Friendship cannot be done without work.
That's very true. And one of the real problems is there are so many different things that we mean when we say friend.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are
absolutely.
There's the next door neighbor who you do not think ill of is your friend rather than your enemy. Dichotomizing friend and enemy is also difficult. There's at least one person who I do not get along at all well with in terms of convention running, who we both adopted cats from one particular rescue situation and had a very good conversation about that in the middle of a period when we were really not doing it all well together. And is he a friend? Is he an enemy? Is he
something you're leaving out acquaintance, you're leaving out a million words.
Yeah.
I would try to reserve friend for people who count on me in some way and I count on them in some way. But I still think you're right, Tom, about the somebody in the chat just said there's a difference between being friends and being friendly, which is precise. And thank you, Cheryl. But I've heard people say things like, "Oh, they're not your friend if you couldn't hand them $1,000 and trust them to give it back to you untouched," or "Oh, they're not your friend if you couldn't call them at 4 in the morning." And I have people I can call at 4 in the morning, and I have people I could hand $1,000 to and trust them to give it back untouched. And I have people that I can call with a particular kind of problem or help me think out a particular situation, and all of them are close friends. um, I think we can't survive without friendship.
I would agree that we can't survive without. Well, I would agree that we can't thrive without friendship. I like to say that the human needs are all universal. So I might need friendship, but I don't need Debbie to be my friend. Although I like having Debbie as my friend. But
We all do.
but the thing is that most of the human needs, once we get beyond the simple physical needs, and as a science fiction fan, I always think needs start with temperature and pressure, and then oxygen. But once we get beyond the things that aren't going to kill us physically, they're still needs, but we might survive. We just won't thrive without them. One other thing that I would say about friendship, that I learned at a diversity training, really an anti-oppression training back east, called Bridges and Boundaries, is that if you say that you have a friend across difference and you haven't had a meal with them, they're not a friend, right? They are an acquaintance.
Mhm.
They are somebody that, as Cheryl pointed out, you're friendly with. They are something. But for me, all friendship is always across difference. Some of that's just because I was transracially adopted, so I grew up with nobody who looked like me. But some of that is just that I think that if I don't pay attention to the differences, it's easy for me to think that people are just like me, and then sooner or later I'm going to have my foot in it.
Mhm. One of the things that I was thinking about with this is that friendship grows out of shared experience. And that experience has to be in many different sensory modalities. And the sharing a meal together is sharing the sense of taste. The sense of smell is often important, but we do an awful lot of sight and sound without even thinking about it. It's not until we start bringing in something else, I think, that we begin to really build friendship.
There's a really interesting question in the chat directed at Ian. And I would love to take a crack at it, but Ian, they asked you first.
I think that it can be just nourishment. The question was whether or not it requires a meal or just nourishment. I think that it can be just nourishment, but I think that what is relevant there is the amount of time and the amount of time away from a structured space, and probably the amount of time that is spent in sort of close community. Like there's all kinds of people who I've met, who I worked with, who I would consider, friendly colleagues, and we've never actually had a meal together, or even gone out to coffee. And I think that one of the things that really builds intimacy is being in more than one space, being able to see who that person is and show that person who I am outside of a single context. The more contexts, the more intimacy generally. I mean, that's a correlation, not a causal relationship, but the more context, the more intimacy, and the more likely I'm going to be able to know who that person is and who I am. If I never leave my apartment, you only see Ian in his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
I love that question. I love Ian's answer, but I read the question very differently. I read the question as, is friendship a physical need, like food, clothing, and shelter, or is it nourishment that maybe you can do with somewhat less of? And I don't really have a good answer, but one of the things I was thinking about saying is that Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General of the United States under Obama and is now something in the Biden administration, and I forget exactly what, talks about a pandemic of loneliness in this country. and the ways that contemporary life makes it harder to make friends and harder to keep friends. And I I know there are people who survive with no friends, and I take Ian's point that it's the difference between surviving and thriving. But to me, it would be such a miserable baseline survival. Um, and one of my goals in life is to move the world away from people in miserable baseline survival.
Mhm.
I think Ian's mission includes a world that works well for everyone. And I've
Mhm.
never written my own mission, but I might steal that if I do.
Mhm. One of the things, I've studied some counseling too, with Ron Kurtz learning Hakomi, and one of their approaches to therapy is that I, as therapist, put myself in a mode of paying attention to what in you is nourishing me, and that's a place to start from
I like
in
that.
you in figuring out how to help the person, and from that I talk with you for a while and find a place where I think you might not be able to accept nourishment and then offer that nourishment to you. And the thing about, they call it loving kindness, which is a bit of jargon, the paying attention to what is nourishing in the person I'm talking with. The thing about doing that is I get fed all the time when I do that. It's something that is just absolutely a win to do. And it does help encourage friendship.
You know,
The other thing I like about that is it starts from a baseline of there is something in you that can nourish me.
Yes.
And I think the world is full of people who don't believe there is anything in them to give. And that is my partner is very fussy about the word tragedy, but I think I'm still going to say that's a tragedy.
I think the single biggest factor that they found, which makes a difference in counseling, is the relationship between the counselor and the client. Right?
Yes.
It trumps modality, it trumps theoretical orientation, it trumps a whole bunch of long words that people with letters after their name know. And I think that it is because, like I quoted Brene Brown earlier, we are here to connect with people. That's why we're here. When we connect with people, we do better. The other thing I would say about that with counseling is that if the wounds happened in a relationship, then the healing has to happen in a relationship as well. And that and when I'm on my game as a counselor, it's a different and more constrained relationship, but it's definitely a relationship. And some of the other work that I've done is on really intense weekends, like the Mankind Project for Men, which has been going on for about 25 or 30 years. Over 100,000 men have gone through worldwide, and the Underground Railroad, which is for Black folks. And on those weekends, things get very, very intense. But one of the things that I've learned and that other people have learned is that if I'm not paying attention to how I'm feeling about that person I'm working with, I'm not going to be nearly as effective, because it is a two-way street.
Yeah.
I keep focusing on the chat because it's interesting. How people I despise have friends. Well, I guess I want, if you accept a couple of very prominent ex-presidents and their entourage, I guess I want the people I despise to have friends. Doesn't for them to be lonely and miserable is not going to make me like them more, or is not going to solve whatever comes between us. I've never been, and I don't understand the kind of person who, when they break up with somebody, wants all their friends to come with them and nobody to go with the other person. The ideal situation, of course, is you can keep friends in common, but if you can't, if it's an ugly breakup, you still don't want the other person to be alone.
Absolutely. When I broke up with a friend up here, I let them have the local science fiction club mostly. I don't go to Vanguard very much, even though I'd been going to it quite a bit, because I wanted to make sure that she had a group of people that she could hang with. And
Yeah.
it seemed easier than trying to have both of us there and trying to get myself into the middle of it.
Right. And as Cheryl just pointed out in the chat, sometimes you're the one that's despised and you don't want to be left. Ian said I stayed friends with him during a dark time. And I think it's fair to say that it was a time when a lot of people, I wouldn't say despised him, but despised what he had done.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was always, okay, yeah, that was awful. But he's Ian, I can see it.
Ian was kind to me in a dark time for me when I was very depressed. And he gave me a pair of CDs that actually were really helpful for getting me out of that mood for an hour or two at a time. And I really value that, even though Ian and I have never been particularly close. I respect him and I like it. And I'm glad he's here, and I'm really enjoying what he's adding to this. But I wouldn't call him, in the sense we've been talking about, a friend. He's an acquaintance, and an acquaintance that I need to know more about. And that's part of why I'm really glad you're here. Does that fit your understanding of me and your relationship with me?
Yeah. I mean, definitely somebody I respect, definitely. And, I think one of the real questions and magic of friendship that I certainly don't understand well is exactly what it is that gets over that hump from acquaintanceship to friendship. Some of it certainly is commonality. There's certainly folks who've spent some time and energy figuring out how to do that. The pickup artists in particular there's a lot of negative things about the pickup artists, and I don't support a lot of their theories, but one of the things that they do talk about is insta-dating and suddenly going from point A to point B in order to build more intimacy. The other thing that I've really noticed about friendships for myself is scheduled time, right? When there's scheduled time, it's very easy to maintain a connection. And when the time is unscheduled, somebody's got to do the work of picking up the 500-pound telephone or biking over to the person's place and knocking on their door. Or which is the only way that I stayed in touch with my best friend during the darkest time in her life, because she wasn't on the phone. I mean, she was really, really depressed. So it was the darkest time of her life. I'd go over and knock on her door. And that is not something that I've been able to think through. Like, it's not like who's worth it. It's just like, when do I have that spark and when do I not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about who's worth it is a terrible way to build friendship.
Yeah, right.
I've had a couple. I mean, there's so many things I want to say here, but one of them is I have a couple of friends who targeted me, who decided they wanted to be my friend and made a real effort to see me regularly, to make plans. And in a particular case that I'm thinking of, this is a woman, and I started out thinking, yeah, sure. Why not? I'll spend some time with her. She seems nice enough. And we've become very close friends, but we never, ever would have if she hadn't taken on the labor, if you will, of deciding to get close to me. Because one of the things about acquaintances is you often can't see what's special about them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Ian, I'm thinking about your what gets over the hump. And I honestly think that it is something like the chemistry in sexual or erotic relationships, you see something, and with me, what it usually is they say something really interesting in a conversation that I'm in, and I'm like, oh, I have to pay attention to this person because they just said something that I really want to think about and know more about, and then I'll tease that out. And if they respond, but it also happens, as I said, I've had people really actively court me as a friend, and one of them is right now one of my closest and most regular contact friends in the Bay Area where I live. So
Yeah, well, this ties right into what Cheryl said in the chat, that longevity is not necessary for a good friendship. But longevity does work with friendship in that the friendship that Deb and I have had has changed incredibly over the 50 years we've known each other. It's gone through some very rough times, and it's gone through some times where we were just not particularly in contact. But there is still a deep respect and understanding that comes from having had some very intense and very peculiar experiences. I'm thinking of the Magic Cellar.
Oh, absolutely. A shared experience. I brought this topic up. Tom asked me if I would come onto this Sunday morning event, and we started chatting about what we might talk about. And after a little while, I said, what's up for me is the rhythms and changes in friendship. And the reason I said that is I had just been to a 60th birthday party for someone who has been a very close friend at some times in my life. And at other times, and more recently, we've been always friendly, but much more distant. And going to her birthday party reminded me that I know her family, I know her husband's family. I know so much of the history of how she became who she is, how she and her husband got together, what having a child meant to them. And you don't lose that in the periods of distance. Tom, it's also true with you, right? Although listening to Ian makes me think I was not there for you in your very dark times the way I might have been.
It's much harder for someone who is a friend to be there when it was much harder when I was drinking. It was hard for me to accept anything from anybody when I was drinking. And there's a sense of, how can I possibly get back to this friend who is not being there? I think that happens in that.
And with you, and also with the friend that Ian used to go visit on his bicycle, I am quick to decide that somebody doesn't want me around, quicker than I should be, quicker to think it's me and not them. And Cheryl says, I have a longtime friend that cuts me off periodically, and I rarely know why. Yeah, my guess is it's not about you at all. Or at least it's mostly not about you. My guess is it's about something that goes on inside them. I've had rough times. I haven't had the kind of dark times that we're talking about in my life because I am incredibly frigging lucky. And because I had a remarkable mother, which is not something a lot of people can say. But anyway, who made lots of friends, and who I was brought up around friends and friends groups and the importance of friendship. I got it rather literally with mother's milk. And I think that is huge. And a sad percentage of people don't have it.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting in terms of the chat is that people are talking about how marriage can destroy friendships. And all three of us have lived very poly lives. So we're not necessarily the right people to talk about marriage destroying friendships with.
Well, I actually think that we're the right people to talk differently about friendships destroying destroying or marriage destroying friendships. The thing that I saw most recently about that I thought was really interesting was some theory that I don't remember what journal I saw it in, that people can only maintain about 13 really close relationships. I think that number must vary from person to person.
Yes.
But it is undoubtedly true that there is some number for everybody. Or some range of numbers for everybody. And I think one of the things that happens with friendships, and I think it also happens when people have children, is that number suddenly expands by more than just one person. When somebody has a child, all of a sudden they have that kid. They also have that kid's friends. They also
and
have those kids'
the parents, they're going to childcare things, and there are other parents there that they have things in common with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Somebody in the Facebook chat asks whether or not that includes family. That absolutely includes family. Although with the family that I grew up in, people say, "Oh, we're like family," and I'm like, you really don't want to invoke that with me if you want any kind of intimacy going on. Yes. There was also a comment that it's a time and energy calculation, and I absolutely agree that it's a time and energy calculation. But I suspect that it's also that I think it's a calculation that's not handled consciously. I think the unconscious does that calculation, then figures out can I manage this or not. And also, like Debbie said, does this person smell right to me? And I think that, when I think about the folks who I know who have disappeared because they got married or disappeared because they got kids in particular, I know there's a book out by PM Press called, I think, Don't Leave Your Friends Behind, about maintaining friendship through parenthood. And I think that from a communitarian perspective, the notion that a dyadic couple can raise a child to be healthy is poorly thought through. I'm trying not to use the stronger language that's, prejudicial towards some of my clients here.
Yes.
Liam talks about introverts and extroverts, and I think that's a really important point. I have threatened for years to write a really serious long essay on introverts and extroverts and how much that is oversimplified. But one kind of useful metric for introvert or extrovert is, does being with people give you energy or take energy away? Yeah. And by that metric, I am absolutely an extrovert. But if for an introvert for whom being with people takes energy away, it would seem obvious to me that you would have to have very few close friends, because you want to be with your friends and you have as much energy as you have. As Ian says, it starts with pressure and what was it? Pressure and energy?
Yeah.
Pressure and pressure.
Boyle's law.
Right.
A Facebook user asked for the definition of dyadic, and that means coupled, two people.
Two people and pretty much nothing else, or limited input other than those two people.
Yeah. Well, and at times people energize me, and at other times they sap my energy. It's not a simple, it's always this way. And different people will sometimes act to sap me whenever I see them, where other people will always give me energy. But it's nowhere near. We do a whole lot of simplification that doesn't actually serve the discussion when we start talking about things like that. People want things to be easy, and they aren't.
My theory is that we're so goddamn binary because we have 2 hands and 2 feet and 2 eyes and 2 ears, and that we're kind of stuck with it, but it doesn't mean you can't push back against it.
Yeah. On the one hand, you might be right. On the other hand, I might have another hand.
Well, there's 2 kinds of people, right? People who divide folks into 2 kinds of people and everybody else.
Yeah. Anyway, but no, I just the friend I was just talking about, whose party I went to, she had a kid, and that is really when we grew apart. And she and her husband are notoriously bad at reaching out to make plans, and I'm kind of 50-50 about it. Not the best, not the worst, and they live far away, and we don't have a car. All those things figure in.
Well, and one of the things that I think about also is um, structure. You know, is there a structure for friendship, right? For years, Debbie and I had a structure for our friendship that at least guaranteed that we saw each other a couple times a year, because we'd be at 2 or 3 conventions depending on the year. And I think we always scheduled time at every one that we were together at. But during the pandemic, we wound up, we wound up connecting and putting something on the schedule, right? I know at one of those conventions there was one of my sweeties and I. We weren't sweeties at the time, but I reached out to her because I was like, I'm going into grad school and I just ain't going to be at that convention for the next couple of years, and you're the person at the convention who I would not see otherwise, who I most want to connect with.
Mhm.
And I think that part of what makes the difference between a sort of one-on-one friendship or a friendship between a person and a couple and a group friendship is that group friendships have group activities that they do together, and
Mhm.
whether those group activities are a weekly, a weekly role playing game night, or a monthly poker night, or a convention, or a weekend that we put on together. Um, Varies from friendship to friendship or friend group to friend group. But what all of these have in common with getting together, with like a scheduled time to get together, is the structure part.
Mhm.
I'm just want to the two things in the chat that I want to pull out is, when you can't force someone to be your friend, you can court someone
Mhm.
and try, but at some point you have to go, okay, that's not working. Um, and the other thing is, find a person someone who knows when to leave you alone. My partner is much, much, much more introverted than I am, and we've gotten really good at that. But one of the things we developed early on is for me to say to him, "Are you talkable?"
Mhm.
Um, because I will just wander in and start a conversation about whatever odd little thing happens to be on my mind at that moment, which is completely context free from his perspective.
Mhm.
But if we start with, "Are you talkable?" he can say, "Not now."
Mhm.
And it's kind of it's an indicator that when he feels talkable, I probably have something on my mind and he should probably come find me. But and this is partners and people who live together and roommates, but it applies to friends too. Ian and I have a monthly phone date, and we usually talk for an hour and a half, and then my ear falls off and I can't do it anymore, but we're not done. But I can absolutely imagine calling me in for a monthly phone date and having him say, "I'm really not up for talking
Mhm.
today," or me saying that to
Yeah.
him. And it would still be the phone date, because we would still have touched base and acknowledged, "You're important to me, I'm important to you." And the mood that you're in isn't a talking mood, but that doesn't change that we're connected.
Yeah. Karen and I have definitely worked out that when she's writing, I don't go in and interrupt her as much as possible. But
Right.
we also have several times she said to me, "Go away." And it doesn't result in me cutting her off later on or anything like that. It's just I know she needs the time right now. Being able to talk about when one needs the time, when one needs the space, is a useful thing in a friendship. You know, figuring out what you can talk
So
about is part of friendship.
I was going to say that just before we went live, I think it was Bob, not Tom, who said, "Is there anything you don't want to talk about?" Which is a terrific
It
question.
was me.
It
Yeah.
was you? I'm sorry. Um, but the more things you can talk about, the deeper the friendship will be. almost everybody has some things they can't or won't talk about. But the wider you can open the net of, this is why I said go away. It wasn't because of you. I would have said it to any human being on the face of the
Mhm.
earth. Um, again, the person in the chat, I think it was Cheryl, who says she has a friend who periodically cuts her off. It would be better if you could talk about why she does that. She may not be able to do it. But the more things you can talk about, the richer the friendship can be. And yet you also have to kind of watch for landmines, right? You try talking about something difficult and the other person starts, their shoulders go up and their voice gets a little lower. And you think, maybe this isn't the time to push this one. It's Tom again, and the somatic
Mhm.
range of friendships,
Yeah.
right? If you're not somewhat aware of the other person's body language, you'll miss a lot.
And the other part of Hakomi is really paying attention to body language and tonality and all the other nonverbal cues. The nonverbal cues are more important than the verbal ones usually.
We were embodied for millions of years before we had language.
Mhm.
One
Not
one thing I would say about conversations to avoid is that there's certainly conversations to avoid, and there's a mutual friend of Debbie's and I who, there's a certain political area where that friend is on one side of the barricades, and Debbie and I are absolutely on the other side of the barricades. It doesn't mean that we can't stay friends with this person. And when I am in the Bay Area, I try to get together with him. But the thing is that you have to agree to disagree. If you don't have an agreement, then all of a sudden it starts to be what I call a black hole in a relationship. And my favorite black hole example is it's monogamous, so it's not from personal experience. But you had that little something something on the side on the business trip. And you come home and you can't talk about it because you can't talk about it. So that's fine. But then suddenly you can't talk about work. And then you can't talk about other things. And it just grows. It like sucks more and more things into the black hole. And eventually there's nothing to talk about unless you do some kind of intervention.
Mhm.
I just to be absolutely clear, Ian, that person is your friend, who is my acquaintance.
Okay. Fair.
But yeah, I mean, if I want to talk about adoption and the reactions of people who are adoptions, I can come to Ian to talk about it because he's my closest friend who is adopted. But I have to come carefully. And I have to think about what I know about where his triggers around that are and what I know about what's sensitive about that. And I would probably start by saying, listen, I have this thing that's going on in the lives of people I care about that's about adoption. Are you up for talking about it?
Right.
And
Cheryl, we all mess up.
yeah,
One of the things I say is that I'm really, really people smart and really, really good at this stuff. And that means I'm right about 70% of the time. Do the math. I'm wrong a lot.
yeah, yeah. The more you study it, the more I studied it, the more I realized how much I get it wrong.
Oh, I get it wrong.
Yeah.
30% of the time is a made up number, but it's not
Yeah.
that far from the truth. And 30% of mistakes in a day is a lot of mistakes in a day.
Yeah. I've taken a lot to saying, if that's the worst mistake I make all day, I'll be happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up in this conversation at some point is friendship repair and relationship repair. And
Good.
like what do you do when you haven't just put your foot in it, but you put your foot in it and then you tromped all over the person's bedroom or whatever, and you are busy trying to figure out something. The friend that I used to bike over to see, because she was so depressed. She and I went into counseling together as friends. There's a bunch of people who are like, you went to a couples counselor for a friendship. They're usually among the folks who would put just in that sentence, like just a friendship. But I think that what made a difference there was, first off, we both valued the friendship, and we were both willing to do something uncomfortable in order to keep it alive. I also think that one of the things that really makes a difference there is the thing that looks like what I did was wrong for the relationship, even if it wasn't necessarily wrong for me. I think about another friend who I was in a group with and resigned from the group in fury because of who basically said, I should have remembered that thing about you and treated you better. She didn't disagree with the decision that the group made. I thought the group made a terrible decision, and I think that, well, I'm righteous about a lot of things, so of course I'm going to think that I'm right. But how much am I willing to admit that I wasn't right for the person, or I wasn't right for the friendship, is distinct from wasn't right for me? Like you don't have to smear shit all over yourself in order to apologize. You just have to say, I wish I had done better, and we'll attempt to do better in the future.
Yeah.
And in fact, smearing shit all over yourself is often very self-centered.
Yeah. Right.
Well, think about it. It would be.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think you're talking about two different things here, and one is when friendships don't work, or when you just. But the other one, which is more interesting to me, is repair.
Yeah.
Because I believe that all relationships, lover relationships and friend relationships, and often family relationships, have lives. Tom and I were extremely close and very good together until we weren't. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't good when it was.
And it doesn't mean there isn't good in it now.
Oh, absolutely. It's just different.
Yeah.
But repair is hard. And I guess the thing that comes to mind first to say about repair is repair takes two people. Or more if there are more in the situation. You can want to repair with your whole heart and completely authentically. And if the other person is not interested in repair, it ain't happening. And if both people want to repair, I think there are almost always ways through. But if only one does, it's like making that friendship in the first place. You can't do it.
You can't do it and stay in a healthy relationship.
Well, that's true.
I mean,
you can bend yourself into a crevice.
I think we've all seen relationships where one person was doing all of the work, and the other person was getting smaller.
Both of them were getting smaller.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah. Leon Westcott was wanting to hear us talk about friendships between men and friendships between women. And I'm not sure whether that's actually following what we're wanting to go off on, because that's an entire huge other section by itself.
I'll say something quick about it, which is it's really cool to be on this call with two men, because men are not socialized to take deep friendships seriously. Men are socialized to make their friendships around sports and cars and joint activities, and not to talk about their feelings, or and that's not men's fault. It's systemic. It's cultural. I think Ian would have a lot to say from his experience in the Mankind Project about this, but I have always valued men who take these things seriously. A really, really interesting Black poet and essayist whom I listened to said during the pandemic that he was having to learn to make friends with the men who had been friends all his life, because the things they did together they couldn't do together anymore. And he was seeing a real shift in male friendships from the isolation, which I haven't stopped thinking about since he said it. If anybody wants a name, that's Clint Smith, and if you're not following him and reading his books, that's your loss. But anyway.
The one thing I would say briefly about that is that I think that men are anti-socialized rather than socialized, and that one of the ways in which men are not served by the patriarchy, although obviously men are economically served by the patriarchy in a number of other ways, is that most men don't know what the hell it is that we feel ever. One of the things they do, and one of the things that I often think about with the Mankind Project is before I did that work, I did some work with, I think it used to be called Nonviolent Communication. I forget what they rebranded it as. And they'd have this thing of like 11 by 7 different frowny faces and sort of frowny faces and sort of smiley faces and sort of grumpy faces to sort out their emotions. And I was always like, if I need this to know what the hell I'm feeling, I just, I'm going to throw my hands up in despair. Yeah. And in the Mankind Project, we talk about 5 basic emotions: mad, glad, sad, afraid, and ashamed. We don't even split shame from guilt. Shame being I am a bad thing and guilt being I did a bad thing. But with 5 emotions, we can know what we're feeling. There's actually some cognitive research which indicates that might be the right 5 starting point, and that might be the right thing. I think that it's all part of whether or not we can make friendships. If we can't make friendship, if we don't know what we feel, it's difficult to recognize the joy that friendship can bring us, and then it's difficult to really prioritize friendship appropriately.
Ian, I don't think I've ever said this to you, but what I don't like about those 5 is that only one of them is positive.
I think that I've heard that before from a number of people. I don't think that there is such a thing as a positive and negative emotions. There are emotions that I like and emotions that I don't. But I think that every emotion carries a message to me, usually from my body, usually about something that I'm not paying attention to. Anger carries the message of violation. Sadness carries the message of loss. Fear carries the message of danger, and joy carries the message of improvement. One of the things that one of my partners said to me after the death of my best friend was that it's a beautiful thing to love somebody so much that you hurt that much.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair, but then there's still a way to say. I have to think about how to say what I'm trying to say about those 5.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That it's hard to, I think it has to do with whether there are things you'd seek. And it's better to have more things that one wants to seek rather than having them be in a tiny minority.
But it's still a useful framework.
Yeah. It's useful to at least have some sort of classification to start with. And Deb, you taught me a great deal about being much more open in terms of my emotions and much more in touch with.
You were hardly brought up to be open about them.
Both my parents were math PhDs. They were not. They did not believe in emotion. They had it, but they didn't believe it. Yes.
You don't have to believe in gravity, but things still fall down.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, we are getting into the end of times now, fairly closely. There's plenty more to talk about.
I assume you mean the end of the end of the podcast rather than the end times. There's certainly a whole lot of things to say about whether we're in the end times, but I don't know that this is a political podcast.
It usually is, unfortunately. This particular one, mine is less so than many.
When Bob's back.
Yes. That's how
you said you're getting into the end times, and I wanted to Tell you, I can channel Hal Lindsey for you.
Please don't.
Debbie, I like it. You got the reference.
I did.
Um, the well,
You can't be a lifelong friend of Tom's if you don't get a lot of references.
yeah. Well, no, you guys have been having a wonderful conversation, and you've touched a lot of very interesting. I mean, you've been a virtual rainbow of covering the spectrum of topics here. I Is there anything, Tom, that you want to drag more out of any of these people on?
I'm likely to drag more out of them individually than in a group discussion, but I'm thinking that we haven't really talked about how to know when is it okay to let go of a friendship.
Hmm.
You know, we've talked a lot about getting them back, rebuilding them, about them having gone, but how can you tell that it's? Do you just tell by not doing it, by not doing the work to keep the friendship going, or
Well, that's the worst way.
you know?
That's the way of lack of awareness. I think Ian was talking about that. Um, in an ideal world, and this is really hard, you sit down with the person and you say, listen, this is feeling different to me than it has. How is it feeling to you? Where do we want to go with it? Or do we just mutually want to let it slide? I don't know that I've ever done that successfully. Um, but it's sort of a model to aspire to. But I know a lot of people whose policy is just ghosting. I'm done with this person, so I'm just going to stop responding. And I hate ghosting. I hate that. I hate that. I would rather, even if it's just, gosh, I'm really busy. Just something that acknowledges, I know you're trying to reach me. I know you're reaching out to me, and I don't have it in me to reach back to you. But as we've said, it could be a rhythm thing also. You could come back to it in a year or 5 years. One thing about having 50-year friendships is you really understand how they can go dormant and then come back to life. I don't think you can know that in the same way when you're 20.
Yeah, and as the Facebook user just said, it's not necessarily a lack of awareness; it's a desire to avoid conflict.
Absolutely, and Ian, say something that goes with that facial expression.
I was thinking a number of things. One of the things that I mean, what I was thinking right that second was it's a lack of awareness of the desire to avoid contact or conflict.
Yes,
right. But I think about a couple who I think are friends of Debbie's and acquaintances of mine whose marriage vows were to stay together as long as it's good and a little bit longer. I think that in terms of ending friendships, not all friendships are with people who are committed to a process, right? Some people have process commitments, which are, we'll be together until one of us dies. And I think about Paradise by the Dashboard Light, a Meatloaf song about, and now I'm waiting for the end of time so I can end my time with you is how that song ends. Mm-hmm. But I also think, and some folks are like, we're going to work on it until we don't. We're going to work on it. We're going to work on it because it's worthwhile. But we're not going to bang our heads against a brick wall forever. What I think is that, I often work from a parts model with my clients. So there's a part of us, right? Yeah. There's a part of me that's still, in first grade deciding to stay in off of the playground and read because of the stuff I was dealing with on the playground. And that part has its own thing. And I think sometimes the parts get together and leave the brain out of the conversation, They look around, they declare quorum, they say, hey, we've got a quorum. They take a voice vote that they do not take minutes of the meeting, and then the brain discovers years later that a decision was made because it looks like only the feet were voting, right?
Yeah.
And, I think that when I have had friendships end, when I have ended friendships, I don't even know what the reasons are necessarily until years later, because I ran across something or because I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I ghosted one partner after her husband sent me a bunch of music that included some pro Klan songs, and I don't mean Sweet Home Alabama. I mean things that were a lot stronger. And the part of me that is responsible for keeping me safe said, the rest of you aren't voting on this. We're the hell out of here. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think that when we end friendships, I'm a big intentionality junkie. But I think that when friendships are ended for us, we're often left wondering what the hell just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to do that to my friends.
Yeah.
While we don't like ending friendships, or sometimes we do, maybe, but I don't enjoy it. I think I like friends. If you got there for a reason in the first place,
Yeah.
and if like many people say about marriage, is that which attracted you together in the first place is often what drives you apart in the end. But I very much appreciate having friends like Tom that bring his friends. And Deb and Ian, you guys have been wonderful. This has been a very in-depth discussion. Reminds me of, if I may interject with, reminds me of when I was young, full of whiskey and not real bright. I was in a bar, tiny little bar, and an old fella and I had got up a conversation, and I said something really stupid to him. I said, "Hey, you're old. Uh, what is the one thing you figured out after being as long as you've lived that needs to be remembered?" And he looked at me like I was an idiot, and then he told me. And Tom just brought it up, and that is knowing when to let go. Uh, and so I've remembered that, but I think I've got my own caveat to that. It's knowing when to um, put a little more effort into hanging on is probably a better answer. And if that don't work, of course you have to let go. You cannot force a friendship no more than you can force a relationship. But you guys have done some wonderful talking on this. Now I have to do the business end of it.
Let me do one thing, Bob, before you do your business,
Please do, Deb.
because I'm going to do it for my friend. Ian has an active counseling business in the Seattle area. It's remote, so you don't have to be in Seattle. I think for the right person, Ian is likely to be an extremely terrific counselor. And he's going to put his contact information in the chat right
Except I
now.
don't think that I can.
If you put it in the private chat, Bob can put it in the chat.
Yeah. Bob or even any of us can, but I will.
It's healingjunipercounseling.com, spelled the way that it sounds.
Anyway, I was not going to let this end without that.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah, because that was a plan from the beginning that you were going to do that.
Yeah, but he got interested in what he was talking about.
So, Ian Hagerman, is that how you pronounce it?
Hageman. There's no R in it. A lot of
Hagerman?
people do that. Yeah.
Well, that just goes to show that the generalities can exist. And so it is there. So you're an MSW, Tom, and some of my I've wonderful friends who are MSWs. What is it that what is the range of your area where you're comfortable talking to people, or is that something you won't even say?
I really like working with trauma, and I like working with couples in order to sort out their relationships. And you know, I like working with folks who are interested in doing the work and understand that it's going to be difficult. I'm a lot more interested in short-term therapy than like having a client for 5 years down the road. I'm wondering how much time I've wasted and how much of their money I've wasted. Um, and um, I mean, that's what I would say right now. I'm still developing my elevator speech.
Well, then that sounds very, very interesting. And as much as I've been to cons, I went to a couple over my life, and I'm confident that you're talking to the right crowd. Uh, the But it is so cool. Now, when I talked about the business end, it's not much of a business because really we're BQ Press. We're not. We are a micro press. You know, the tiny little press. We look up from a step stool to see the reflections off of the heavens of uh, people like Tor and such. But what we do have is we have some wonderful editors and some wonderful quality work that gets done here by the people we bring in. And one of the people we bring in a lot is Tom and Karen. And so we have a book coming out probably in February called Madam President. Um, the whole premise of it is no, it's not a woman as president of the United States. It's a woman in the primary leadership role. You know, how did she get there? How is it different? Uh, what is the essence of it? And so we have had a lot of fun with it. We pared it down to 20 short stories, and we've got an interesting David Gerald of Tribble fame is written us a wonderful, wonderful piece for it, as well as has Karen Anderson.
I read Karen's piece when I was staying with Tom and Karen last week, and
Oh, you?
I will tell you the ending will surprise you.
Yeah, Karen. She warned me that says you may not want to use this, and it's like Karen, you warning me I may not want to use something is just like enticing me. You know, it's the because no, I've never read anything Tom's written, but I can tell you this: I have Karen is possibly one of the uh, greatest latecomers to the practice of writing fiction that I've ever met, and she is brilliant at it. And whenever I get around to doing a best of B cubed, I can guarantee you it'll be a question not of if Karen's in it, but how many times Karen's in it. But that's another story. What I was saying is we have that book coming out in about a month or so that Karen is got a wonderful story in. And then after that, we have a book called Scott's Planet. You take a corporation that has, imagine if the corporation sponsored all this migration and then said, you know what, we're not making any money off of it, and abandoned all the planets across the galaxy that weren't profitable. No, I can't imagine a corporation doing that. But this is the story of that abandonment and how it works. Uh, and then after that, we have a book called um, Oh God, this is the sucky thing about getting old and having your short-term memory uh, turn into an opaque cloud of cosmic dust. Um, what it's called Alternative Truths, Southern Edition. Bless their hearts. That Karen is actually editing, and our first book, as everybody, many people here will remember, was Alternative Truths. It was we published it 100 days into the Trump presidency, and poked a little bit of fun at Trump and his cronies. Well, the South seems to have totally embodied the essence of Trump in many ways. And so we're doing a Southern edition. And that editor is KG Anderson, Karen Anderson, and she's going to do a wonderful job. And that's the business end of it. And that said, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Ian. And any last words?
It was great to be here.
Well, Ian?
Thanks to Tom and Debbie for the invitation. It was great. I learned
Good.
some stuff.
Really glad to
It was a
have
good day
had
when I
you.
learned.
Really glad to have had you both.
And reading the comments, guys, you all were well received. And so thank you all. Thank you, people who chose to get up Sunday morning, have your coffee, and watch us. Susan knows who I'm talking to.